Well, why do certain people fall in love with you in particular? Maybe it's something in your manner, your smile, or perhaps your energy that seems irresistible. And what if I told you that the reason someone falls in love with you has almost nothing to do with your looks or even your outward personality? Carl Jung, one of the most brilliant psychologists of all time, believed that passion doesn't just happen by chance. In fact, there are invisible, profound forces silently at work within each of us, shaping whom we choose to love. According to him, there are just two main reasons someone is intensely drawn to you, and neither has anything to do with superficiality. Are you ready to delve into the incredible universe of human passion, according to Carl Jung, and discover why certain people seem tailor-made to awaken such powerful feelings in you? In this video, we'll unpack all of that, clearly, deeply, and in a way you can apply to your own life. You'll understand how the unconscious mind works in love, why you're attracted to certain types of people, and what's behind that feeling of a magical connection that can sometimes turn to chaos. You'll find out why some relationships seem to drain you, while others awaken you. And best of all, you'll learn how to use love as a tool for self-discovery, instead of an emotional trap. If you're tired of repeating patterns, if you feel like you always end up in the same place, even though you try to do everything differently, this video is for you. Because love isn't an unsolvable mystery. It has a logic to it, a psychodynamic. And when you learn to decode that language, everything changes. Let's do this together, because what comes next may reveal more about you than any mirror ever could. You know when two people meet by chance and say it was destiny? Well, maybe it wasn't exactly chance or destiny. Those events may be the unconscious at work behind the scenes, silently pulling the strings of what seemed like an inexplicable attraction. Carl Jung shows us that these meaningful coincidences, what he called synchronicities, aren't just random occurrences. When it comes to love, there's an internal logic that goes far beyond common logic. This logic lives in what Jung called the collective unconscious. The unconscious mind works in curious ways. It draws in experiences, people, and situations that have something to teach or to reveal. We don't fall in love by accident. There's always a dance happening between what I lack and what the other apparently provides. Sometimes the attraction is so intense it feels like it's from another lifetime. Other times, it grows slowly, but with a magnetic pull. It's as though the other person arrives with some cryptic message, something only the soul can decode. And this has everything to do with Jung's archetypes and the silent workings of the unconscious mind. Want a simple example? Take that friend who keeps saying she always falls for emotionally distant guys. She might not realize that what she's really seeking is emotional stability, something she lacks in herself. Or the guy who only goes for people who are intense and dramatic might be unconsciously searching for contact with his own repressed emotions. These stories aren't rare. They happen all the time, and they're no accident. They're signs that the unconscious is trying to balance the internal scales by using the other person as a mirror. From the perspective of depth psychology, love is almost like solving a puzzle. Often the other person is just the setting where a much older story unfolds. A story that began inside you long before you even knew what love was. That's why, once we grasp that relationships follow internal patterns, everything changes. Those repeated experiences stop being bad luck and become a code, a call to discover what's hidden behind those recurring themes. And that changes the question again. Are we truly loving the other person? Or are we in love with what they make us feel? Are we seeing them clearly or just projecting onto them our own desires, fears, and fantasies? Picture looking at someone as though you were gazing into a mirror without realizing the reflection is actually you. That's what happens when we project. Carl Jung said projection is one of the most common phenomena in the unconscious mind. Put simply, you see in the other what's inside of you but still unacknowledged. And the interesting thing is, we often fall in love precisely with that reflection. It feels like we found someone special when, in reality, we found a forgotten part of ourselves. Projection works like tinted glasses. Everything you see goes through that lens. If your glasses are fogged up with expectation, emotional need, or idealization, then what you see will be distorted. And the most dangerous part is that, in the beginning, it all seems perfect. You know that overwhelming passion, that certainty of this is the right person? More often than not, it's pure projection. The problem is that eventually the mirror breaks, and then the disappointment hits like a shock. You discover that the other person wasn't who you thought, but who you needed them to be. This happens in all kinds of relationships, but it's especially intense in romantic ones. For instance, when someone saves the life of a person who's always felt abandoned, that person might project onto them the figure they lacked in childhood, a protector, a caregiver, a source of comfort. But the reality is, they're just an ordinary human being. When that idealized image starts to crack, the relationship gets shaky. Jung would call this a confrontation with the shadow. That's where the real work starts. Real love is born only after projection crumbles. So, how do you know if you're truly loving someone or just projecting onto them? One clue is to look at the level of idealization. If you feel the other person is too perfect or unlike anyone else, it might be time to step back. Another indicator is to pay attention to the sudden feelings of anger, frustration, or excessive demands that arise later on. Often, they point to the mirror starting to crack and the unconscious trying to show you something of yours. And when that crack appears, it's not the end, it's the beginning, because now you can see what was hidden. You can finally understand why certain people captivate you so strongly and why some of those relationships always end the same way. But before we talk about that repeated pattern, we need to understand what truly draws one person to another. And then the answers begin to make sense. You know when someone says, "You're everything I needed"? It might sound sweet, and sometimes it really is. But from a depth psychology perspective, that phrase can reveal something more complex. Jung teaches us that what we lack in ourselves is usually what we project onto the other person. In other words, we fall in love with someone who embodies a part of us that's dormant or repressed. And the other person is also drawn to what they sense they're missing. It's a dance of unconscious complementation, as if, without realizing it, we're trying to complete ourselves with what the other person seems to have. A common example, a very rational person falls for someone who's emotionally free, spontaneous, passionate. Initially, that difference is enchanting. But over time, it can become a source of conflict. What was enchanting becomes too dramatic, too out of control, or unrelatable. Why? Because what drew you in is exactly what you're missing, and what the ego doesn't know how to handle. Jung would say that's the shadow at work. The shadow, according to Jung, contains everything we repress, but that remains alive deep down, waiting for a chance to emerge, and love gives it that chance. That's why deep relationships tend to be so challenging. Not because they're wrong, but because they're such accurate mirrors. The person who enters our life and throws us off balance may be showing us what we haven't yet integrated. Introverts are captivated by extroverts, confident types by insecure ones, free spirits by controlling partners, and vice versa. Each side is unconsciously searching for an experience that complements them, but often this search ends up creating relationships built on need rather than on conscious choice. The risk here is emotional dependence. When you need the other person to feel whole, you hand them the power to define your worth. And that's dangerous, because they can leave, they can change, they can disappoint your expectation. When that happens, everything collapses. The key is recognizing, what does this person represent to me? Not just who are they? That single question changes everything, because it forces you inward to the root of the attraction, not just the surface. But wait, there's a second reason, even more subtle and mysterious, why we fall in love with some people and not others. Sometimes, what attracts us isn't just what's missing, but what's asleep. Something deep, archetypal, that lives within all of us. Something that one day is awakened by someone you barely know, and yet who seems to already live inside you. Has it ever happened to you that you meet someone and almost immediately feel like they know you on the inside? As if they have a hidden key to a door you didn't even know you had? Well, maybe they do. According to Jung, we all carry universal images in our psyche called archetypes. When we fall in love, often it's because someone has unknowingly tapped into one of those sleeping archetypes. It's not the person themselves who seduces us, it's what they activate within us. Two archetypes play an essential role in relationships: the anima, the feminine side in men, and the animus, the masculine side in women. Jung believed every person carries a psychic image of the opposite sex inside them, and that this image deeply influences our passions. When we meet someone who resonates with this internal figure, it's as if a puzzle piece snaps into place. A natural magnetism emerges. The connection feels magical. But again, it's not magic. It's the unconscious saying, "Hey, you recognize me." Imagine a man who's always idealized a woman who is sweet, mysterious, sensitive, and one day he meets someone exactly like that. Voila, anima activated. Or a woman who's drawn to someone she sees as rational, strong, confident. That's her animus at work. Interestingly, these images aren't just personal experiences. They belong to the collective unconscious. They're symbolic figures we've all carried since forever, silently influencing our emotional bonds. This kind of attraction is powerful, intense, almost uncontrollable, yet it's also fragile, because the internal image we project onto the other person rarely matches reality. Sooner or later, the real person starts to differ from the archetypal figure, and that's when the magic can turn into estrangement. What seemed so right starts to feel off. Jung called that the withdrawal of projection, when the veil drops and you finally see who the other person really is, and more importantly, who you are. Don't be alarmed. This process is necessary, because only after projections dissolve can true love emerge, the kind that sees with clarity, that embraces the real rather than the ideal. When that happens, we often face an uncomfortable truth. The other person was never what they seemed. And that perfect love, it might have been just a fantasy waiting to collapse. At first, everything seems to fit perfectly. The conversations flow, the touch is electric, you can communicate with just a glance. You think, this time is different. And maybe it is, but there's one detail many people forget. In the beginning, we're not seeing the other person. We're seeing what we want them to be. Carl Jung said that projection is stronger in love than in any other human relationship. That's why it's so easy to confuse passion with truth. The unconscious mind is there, weaving a seductive story that isn't necessarily real. Then comes the inevitable moment. The fantasy starts to crumble. The person who seemed perfect reveals their flaws. The differences that once seemed cute turn into irritations. Compatibility becomes conflict. This is normal and expected. In-depth psychology. When the projected image starts to fade, the relationship hits a critical juncture. Not because the love is gone, but because it's about to be tested. What's shattering isn't the feeling, it's the illusion. Many relationships end exactly here because once the veil lifts, some people feel deceived. They think you've changed. But in reality, the only change is in the lens through which they were seeing the other person. Jung's concept of the shadow starts to surface. That side you denied, the one that was never part of your perfect script. At this point, you either face it with maturity or run away. You chase the next passion, the next projection, and thus the cycle repeats without any real learning. A classic example is couples who fall in love intensely, make big plans in just a few days, live an emotional honeymoon, and then collapse under the weight of routine, individuality, and personal baggage. It's not a lack of love, it's an excess of fantasy. The unconscious mind fabricated a myth. Now, reality has come to rearrange the pieces. At this point, most people believe the relationship failed. In fact, it's only facing its first real test of awareness. If you can get through that, something much more real can be born. But it takes courage. The courage to look at yourself and ask, what was I projecting onto this love? What did I refuse to see? And that's when a new phase begins, a phase where self-knowledge becomes the best antidote against delusions in love. Here's a simple yet powerful truth. The less you know yourself, the more you project. And the more you project, the more frustration you'll have in relationships. Carl Jung said, projection is the psyche's way of trying to make itself whole. But without awareness, this process becomes a cycle of disappointment. The good news, there is a way to break that cycle by getting to know yourself. When you understand how the unconscious mind works, you start seeing that much of what you believed was the other person was, in fact, your own stuff. Self-knowledge acts like a flashlight in the dark. It lights up repetitive patterns, shadow traits, and archetypal forces guiding you without your realization. Have you noticed how certain stories repeat in your relationships? How you feel you're always attracting the same kind of person? That's not bad luck, it's an unconscious script. Once you begin to watch yourself honestly, the pieces start falling into place. You start identifying triggers, empty spots, hidden desires, and the power shifts to your hands. But be patient. Getting to know yourself isn't about judging yourself or trying to fix everything. It's more like having a chat with your forgotten parts. Simple practices can help. Keeping an emotional journal, doing Jungian therapy, paying attention to your dreams, noticing how you react when you fall in love. The point is to create intimacy with who you really are, because the more clearly you see yourself, the more gently you see others. That doesn't mean your relationships will automatically become easy, but they'll become more genuine. You stop searching for your other half and start seeking real connections where nobody has to complete anyone else but can instead share. Here's a precious tip from Jung. If you want to love better, start by looking inside. Love starts within. It's internal before it's external, and that might be the biggest personal revolution you can experience. As you begin living relationships more consciously, you realize that even the ones that hurt you deeply may have arrived to heal. Sometimes the other person didn't come to stay. They came to show you something essential, something you could only learn through love's mirror. Not every relationship is meant to last, but many are meant to transform you. Some people come into our lives like bridges. They carry us from one emotional state to another, and sometimes that's all it is. Jung teaches that every encounter is an opportunity for growth. In depth psychology, relationships are like rituals, places where the unconscious takes shape, and where the shadow, according to Jung, has a chance to appear and hopefully be integrated. That's why it's no exaggeration to say that to love is also to heal. There are relationships that didn't work out, but taught you what you needed to work out with yourself. There are stories that seemed like failures, but opened up internal doors you never knew existed. Here's a metaphor that helps. Think of the other person as a bridge, sometimes sturdy, sometimes shaky, but always with the mission of taking you forward. The other person isn't the destination, just the path. And if you cross that bridge mindfully, you'll emerge on the other side, more aware, more whole, more awake. Of course, this doesn't mean it won't hurt. Some bridges sway, others collapse. But even those can matter. Jung would say there's no evolution without confronting pain. For example, the pain after a breakup might be exactly what pushes you inward. It forces you to ask, what was this trying to teach me? What haven't I seen in myself? It's in those moments that the collective unconscious, with its archetypes of loss, grief, and rebirth, shows its power, and each one of those symbols is an invitation to transformation. Looking for a practical example of how to turn pain into awareness? Write a letter to someone who impacted your love life. Don't send it. Just use it to understand. Put down everything you learned, everything it awakened in you. Name the feelings, spot the patterns. This is an exercise in integration, a direct way of dialoguing with your unconscious mind and your emotional shadow. Gradually, what was only pain becomes wisdom, and what seemed like an end becomes a doorway. Now you might be wondering, why do I always attract the same kind of relationship? Understand, it's not coincidence, it's a pattern. And patterns are the unconscious mind's favorite mode of operation. Carl Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." In other words, the relationships you have today might just be repeats of old stories, many of them written in childhood. Not out of spite, but because that's how the psyche tries to heal itself, by replaying trauma, hoping this time it'll get resolved. Repeated romantic patterns usually tie back to unhealed wounds, abandonment, rejection, feeling unworthy. And most of us aren't aware we're carrying these wounds. We go through relationships that start off differently but end the same way. It's like the unconscious is saying, let's try again, but my way this time. And so we run on emotional autopilot, repeating the same choices, rationalizing our pain. But deep down, it's the same script seeking a new ending. To break out of that cycle, the first step is to recognize it, and that takes courage. It means stopping, looking back, and asking, when did I first feel like this? Who was the first person to make me feel this way? Often, the pattern starts well before your first romance. It may stem from family dynamics, your relationship with your father or mother, early experiences that shaped how you feel loved, or not. Jung's shadow holds all of that. Only by bringing it into the light can you start making different choices. The second step is finding support. That's not weakness, it's wisdom. Therapies that delve into the unconscious, like Jungian therapy, are powerful tools for unraveling these hidden scripts. You can also start with practices like emotionally focused meditation, reflective journaling, family constellations, anything that helps you go deeper. The idea isn't to blame the past, but to free your present, to realize you're not condemned to repeat. You can rewrite your story. Once you begin to break these patterns, a new question arises. Are my ideals of love truly mine? Or were they put there by movies, songs, and stories that told me what love should be? Have you ever stopped to think about where your ideas of love come from? That image of a perfect couple, soulmates, a happy ending with a soundtrack and pink skies? Indeed, Jung said that beyond the personal unconscious, there's something larger connecting us all, the collective unconscious. And within it dwell archetypes, universal images that shape our thoughts, emotions, and also our romantic dreams. It's as if, deep down, we carry an invisible script of what love is supposed to look like. Just look around. From an early age, we're bombarded with stories of idealized love. Disney films, soap operas, romantic comedies. All of it builds an emotional template within us. The helpless maiden, the heroic rescuer, the single kiss that solves everything. Without realizing, these symbols enter our unconscious mind and start influencing how we feel, choose, and even suffer. It's not just culture, it's depth psychology. They're Jungian archetypes quietly guiding the love stories in your life. Want to see how this works? How many times have you dismissed someone amazing because they weren't your type? But what is that type, really? Often it's an idealized image rooted in these archetypes. The mysterious rebel, the alluring muse, the strong protector. Images that originated outside of you but now dwell within. And the worst part, as you chase that ideal, you might miss out on what's real. True love. Not the perfect fantasy, but the honest presence. Deconstructing these ideals is challenging, yes, but also liberating. It's like removing tinted lenses and finally seeing the other person for who they truly are, not for what the movies said they should be. That's the moment you start making conscious choices. Instead of running after a pre-packaged story, you start writing your own with flaws, successes, stumbles, and beauty. Because real love is just that. Imperfect, but true. No masks, no script. Which brings us to the big shift. When you realize that love isn't about finding someone to complete you, it's about finding someone to reveal you, someone who awakens in you what was already there, just waiting to be seen. In the end, love has always been less about the other person and more about you. Every person who's crossed your path, every crush, every heartbreak, they were all mirrors. Mirrors reflecting what you loved, what you feared, and what you didn't yet understand about yourself. Jung said the path of individuation, of integrating the soul, goes through encounters, intense, confusing, transformative. And love is one of the most powerful shortcuts on that journey. Not because it fixes everything, but because it reveals everything. The right person doesn't complete you, they reveal you. That phrase alone changes everything. It takes the focus off your sense of lack and puts it on awareness. When you understand this, you stop looking for someone to save you and start looking for someone to grow with. Someone who doesn't run from your shadow but helps you illuminate it. Someone who doesn't fit your ideals but resonates with your truth. That's mature love, awake love, love that builds. Then you realize loving another is also an act of self-love, because the more you know yourself, the more freely and truthfully you love. The archetypes no longer rule you. The unconscious mind becomes your ally. You switch off autopilot and experience relationships with open eyes. And that changes everything, because now you're choosing consciously, wholly, and ready. So here's my invitation. Take everything you've learned here and apply it to your life. Notice your patterns, question your desires, investigate what attracts you, and most importantly, look at yourself with kindness. Because real love begins there, begins in the encounter between you and you. From that place, any new relationship that appears will mirror your expansion, not your need. Now tell me, what was the biggest insight this video gave you? Have you ever been in a relationship that revealed something deep about yourself? Share in the comments. Your story might help someone else. And, of course, if this content resonated with you, be sure to like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you can join us as we keep exploring self-knowledge, depth psychology, and consciousness expansion. Because this is only the beginning. See you next time.